is the Folksy Friend, and on this channel I like to talk about stories, in particular folk tales, beliefs, and mythologies. Do you want to introduce yourself? What was that? Today we are talking about fairy tales. The story of the Juniper tree is a warning about what happens when you allow the evil nature of greed to seep in and take over. Oh, okay. And you end up doing some pretty horrific things. This story was one of the many compiled by the brothers Grimm in the first edition of their 1812 book, Children's and Household Tales. In the appendices of this first edition, there is a note that tells us that the story The Juniper Tree was supplied by a painter named Philip Otto Runge. This is one of the brothers Grimm most graphic stories, if you hadn't been able to tell by the title of this video, and it actually requires a trigger warning. So, warning, this story entails child abuse, murder, and cannibalism. Potentially not safe for little ones. And with that being said, once upon a time, there was a husband and wife, and what they wanted more than anything in the world was to have a child. Every night, the pious wife would pray to God to bless her with a baby. Now, the husband and wife were relatively well off, and in the courtyard in front of their house, there was a juniper tree. One winter, the wife was out peeling apples in front of the juniper tree, and she accidentally cut her hand. She saw the red blood drip onto the snow beneath her. It's graphic, I told you. And in that moment, she wished for a child that was as red as blood and as white as snow. Sorry about this, I'm not sure what's going on. Over the next 7 months, the wife watched as the juniper tree slowly came out of dormancy, began to grow, turn green, flower, and eventually bear fruit. On the 7th month, she took the fruit that the juniper tree had borne, and she ate it with a great hunger. Soon after this, she became very ill. On the 8th month, she told her husband that if she were to die, if anything were to happen to her, then she should be buried beneath the juniper tree. On the 9th month, she gave birth to a baby boy, and the sight of him made her so happy that her heart stopped, and her husband fulfilled her wish and had her buried beneath the juniper tree. The husband mourned and took time to recover his heart, and when he started to feel like he could go on, he met a new woman and remarried. Together, they had a daughter. Now, his new wife loved her daughter more than anything in the world, but she did not love her stepson. She was worried that he would prevent her daughter from claiming her rightful inheritance, meaning the entire estate, from her father. Her concern became so great that the evil one came and filled her mind, turning her fears to anger and causing her to begin to abuse the boy. The child became constantly fearful. When he would come home from school, there was no safe place in his home. One day, it just so happened that the daughter asked her mother for an apple. So the mother went to the chest with the apples, unlocked the sharp lock, lifted the heavy lid, and took out an apple. Handing it to her daughter, the little girl asked, "Well, what about my brother? Is he to have an apple?" And in that moment, she became angry, and the evil one overtook her mind again. She snatched the apple away and said, "You must not eat before your brother does." And in that moment, she saw him through the window, coming home from school. So the new wife took the apple, put it back in the chest, and closed the lid. The little girl went upstairs, and soon the son appeared in the doorway. The new wife called him over and asked if he wanted an apple, but she had a severe look on her face, and he became afraid. He asked her to pass him an apple, but that wouldn't do for her plans. Changing her face to be nice and cheerful, she told him that he could just come over and choose one, and she lifted the heavy lid of the chest. The little boy went over and leaned in, and in that moment, she snapped the lid down, severing his head, which fell in among the apples. She realized what she had done and was desperate to get out of the blame of the situation. So she took the little boy, and his head, and her scarf, and sat him at the doorway in a chair, tying his head onto his body with the scarf. Then she got to work just preparing dinner as normal. Not too long later, the daughter came into the kitchen and told her mother that her brother was acting strange. She had found him sitting near the door in a chair with a dazed look on his face, and he wasn't moving. There was an apple in his hand, but when she asked for it, he didn't answer. Her mother told her, "Well, Marlene, go back and ask him again. And if he doesn't answer, box his ears." Which basically means smack him upside the head. And as she expected, a few seconds later, the wife could hear her daughter's screams. Marlene came running into the kitchen, sobbing, saying that she had knocked her brother's head off and that he was dead. Her mother was severe with her, scolding her, saying, "Oh, look what you have done. Now we must hide the evidence. And the only way to accomplish that is to chop him up and serve him in the stew." And that's what she did. She chopped up her stepson, cooked him into the stew she was preparing, all while Marlene watched, tears of grief and horror streaming down her face. She cried so much that they didn't need to add any more salt to the stew. Not too long later, the husband came home and sat down at his kitchen table, asking where his son was. His wife told him that his son had decided to go stay with his late mother's family, and the father was upset because his son had said nothing to him about this. His wife reassured him, saying that he would be gone about 6 weeks and that everything was fine. Then she served him the stew, and he was delighted by how wonderful it tasted. He told them that he felt that this meal was meant to be his alone, so he set about devouring the entire pot. And after a few minutes, he looked over to see that Marlene was still crying her eyes out. But he reassured her, telling her not to miss her brother. He would be home in a couple of weeks. As he would come to a bone, he would throw it beneath the table. Marlene went upstairs and gathered her best silk scarf from the bottom drawer of her dresser. She took it downstairs and carefully gathered up every single one of her poor brother's bones. Tying it up, still unable to stop herself from weeping, Marlene took them outside, not realizing that she had begun to cry tears of blood. She placed the bundle under the juniper tree and suddenly felt a little better. The tree began to move, the branches swaying almost as though they were clapping. Mist began to rise all about the tree, and in the center it looked as though a fire had begun burning. Suddenly, a beautiful bird shot out of the flames, singing the loveliest song Marlene had ever heard. And in her heart, she felt that her brother had been reborn, that he lived on. And when she looked down, she saw that his little bundle of bones had disappeared. The bird flew down to the village, stopping at the goldsmith's house, and there he began to sing a beautiful song, which I will read for you because I sing like a dying Wookiee. My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My sister Marlene gathered all my bones, tied them in a silken scarf, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I. Enchanted, the goldsmith rushed out of his house, still grasping the golden chain he had been creating. He looked at the bird in wonder and asked if it would sing the song again, but the bird replied, I never sing twice for nothing. But he said, if you give me that golden chain, I will sing for you again. Happily, the goldsmith handed over the chain, which the bird grasped in its talon, and he repeated the song, then flew away straight to the shoemaker. Upon hearing the wondrous song, the shoemaker and all his family and all his employees went running out of his shop and saw this magnificent bird perched on their roof. He cried that the bird was magnificent, with feathers of green and red, and a neck that looked as if it were made of pure gold, eyes that shone like stars. The shoemaker asked for the song again, but the bird told him, I never sing twice for nothing. That's when the shoemaker told his wife to quickly go grab the best pair of red shoes from the top shelf, which she did, and offered them to the bird. He took the shoes in his free talon and repeated his beautiful song, then flew away down to the grist mill. Once again, he sang his beautiful song, and the 20 miller apprentices who had been working All stopped, one by one, to listen. Finally, the last one looked at the bird and asked if he would sing his song again. Again the bird replied, "I don't sing twice for nothing." And he asked for the millstone. It took all 20 apprentices using a wooden beam to lift the millstone enough for the bird to swoop down and stick his head through the hole in the center. Wearing the millstone like a necklace, the bird flew back up into the trees and again sang his song. Then off the bird went back towards his father's house. Now his family was together in the sitting room, and all of a sudden his father remarked that he was just feeling happy. But the wife replied that she suddenly felt uneasy, as though a great storm were approaching, and Marlene began to cry. The bird landed on their roof, and the father said this time he was very happy. He felt as though a long-lost acquaintance was going to visit soon. But the wife replied that she was afraid. Her teeth were chattering, and it felt like fire burned beneath her veins. Marlene crouched down into a corner, crying so hard that her white handkerchief became see-through. The bird moved from the roof, flying over and landing in the juniper tree, and there he began to sing his song. "My mother, she killed me." The wife closed her eyes and held her hands over her ears, suddenly hearing a roaring storm around her. Her eyes burned and flashed like lightning. "My father, he ate me." The father said that it must be such a beautiful bird to be singing so splendidly, that the sun was warm and bright, and he could suddenly smell cinnamon. "My sister Marlene." Marlene set her head on her knees and sobbed harder. The father stood and said he wanted to go outside and see the bird, but his wife begged him not to. She said it felt like the whole ground was shaking and the house was on fire. But he went outside anyway, tied them all in a silken scarf, laid them beneath the juniper tree. "Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I." With the last word, the bird dropped the golden chain, landing around the father's neck. And overjoyed, the father rushed back inside to show off his new gift, telling them that it was a wonderful bird. But his wife cannot stop feeling a great terror, and she falls out of her chair to the ground. The song began again. "My mother, she killed me." The wife began to beg that she were deep beneath the ground, so far down she could not hear this terrible song.
"It's not my fault. I'm not to blame."
"My father, he ate me." The wife collapsed, going limp on the floor as if she were already dead. "My sister Marlene." At her name, Marlene stood and rushed outside to see what the bird might have for her. "Gathered all my bones, tied them in a silken scarf." He tossed down the shoes. "Laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a beautiful bird am I." Marlene picks up the shoes and rushes back inside, telling her parents that when she had gone out, she felt terribly sad, but now she felt so much better, and the bird had also given her a gift. That's when the wife jumped up from the floor, her hair standing up wild around her as though it were flames. She screams that she feels the world is ending and that she must go outside to see if the bird will make her feel better. The wife rushes out, and the bird drops the millstone on her head, crushing her to death. At the sound, the father and Marlene rush outside to find their garden full of flames, but it burns away, and suddenly there stands the sun. He came forward, taking his father and sister by the hand, and all three were very happy, and they went into the house, sat down at the table, and ate. I love the ending of this story so much, because it leaves so much unanswered. Did they just leave the body there? How did the husband know that the wife had done something wrong and deserved to be killed? Maybe they didn't see her under the stone. Then where would they think she went? So many questions. We have to assume that, beyond the suspension of disbelief that you normally accept with a fairy tale, that there had to be more magic at work here. Magic that made the husband simply ignore the wife when she began acting like a lunatic. Anyway, that was the Juniper Tree. This story has been adapted into novels, films, songs, and even an opera. As is the case with all fairy tales, really, there are different versions of this story from different parts of the world. I found 5 versions of the story that are so similar that it seems that someone was spreading this story in particular, That or random groups of people were making up stories of cannibal fathers and dead children turning into birds. Human imagination is an impressive thing. If you're interested, here are all the ways these stories are similar. Feel free to pause and read over if you'd like. The juniper tree is full of religious symbolism. There's a clear connection to God, with the first wife being pious and praying, and a very obvious connection to the devil with the second wife. Not only is he described as the evil one inspiring her actions, but we can't deny that the references to fire and burning were definitely an indication as to where she was going after death. We also see a lot of nature symbolism, the motif that nature is life. The juniper tree itself mimics the cycle of pregnancy for the first mother, then literally gives life to the son again. Nature is good, kind. It helps those who are themselves good. Overall, the message is pretty clear. Don't give in to evil. Don't let your bad impulses and negative thoughts allow you to follow a path that goes straight where it's very toasty. I hope you enjoyed this story. It was interesting, to say the least, to read and research. Although many of the Brothers Grimm's stories involve some level of violence and bloodshed, this one in particular was a lot. And that's why next week I will be going over a very light-hearted story about a young man that just wants to make a princess laugh. Thank you for spending some time with me here today, and I'll see you next week.